Hey, everybody. So glad that you are back, and glad that you're back even after the controversial lesson last week. But we've been talking about some things that are just so important. We've been talking about marriage. And the title, of course, is Improve Your Marriage by Yourself, because there's no other way to improve your marriage. If you're trying to improve your marriage by getting your spouse to change or by getting your spouse to improve, you're going to fail. The marriage is going to have all kinds of problems. The only way for you to be able to work on your marriage is to work on yourself and to forget about your spouse. But we say improve your marriage by yourself together because this is best done together. We want all of us together to do this. We want you as a husband and wife to do this together, improving yourself together, and boy, that's going to make the marriage beyond your wildest dreams if that takes place. We've had some good things. We've been really using Genesis 3 as the foundation for this. We've, of course, talked about what happens when marriages go south, that it's bad, no matter what. It's bad when a divorce happens. It creates all kinds of problems in everybody's life, not just yours, but the people surrounding you. We looked at Genesis 2, verses 18 through 25, and saw the foundations. And so this whole class, these 3 lessons, we used the 4-part outline that we find in Genesis chapter 2. First week we covered severance. And I hope that, if that's been a problem, and this probably has been a bigger problem in more of your marriages than what you have realized until we start talking about it, and maybe some of the follow-up conversations, you discovered some of these things. But there needs to be severance. You need to cut the umbilical cord, ending the dependence that you have on your parents, whether it's financial, emotional, just a loyalty kind of thing, meeting expectations, all of that your nuclear family, now that you're married, your nuclear family is the two of you as husband and wife and any kids that you have. And we talked about permanence then, that you've got to completely eliminate from your vocabulary any kind of talk about the D word. In fact, we say the D word.
Right.
Because and I think that's one of the things that we've had going for us, is that we just absolutely were committed to never, ever using it as a threat, and we've never even joked about it.
Or manipulation.
Or manipulation is so often used as a tool of manipulation. The trouble is, and this is what I've seen happen with couples, is that sometimes they will use it as like a shocker, hoping that it was going to manipulate the conversation and get my husband to change or get my wife to change. So they use it as a shocker, but then it doesn't get the reaction that they were hoping to, and then they wound up going down a path, because they used that word, going down a path that they had never dreamed of going down.
Or it just built up resentment too, because it shut down the conversation. You couldn't discuss it anymore, and pretty soon just resentment built up.
Because nobody feels loved or respected when that D word is used in a conversation as a threat. And even joking about it, you do not feel loved or respected when that word is ever used. So I hope that came through clearly. Just this is a permanent relationship. The two of you are married for the rest of your lives. And Linda, this has been the policy my entire married life. I will never marry a couple. I will never perform the wedding unless they tell me they're absolutely committed to this being a relationship the two of them are going to have for the rest of their lives, and that they will never use the D word as a threat or in humor. And so it's a big deal. Then we talk about unity. We talk about the barriers for unity and all that. And then last week, of course, the lion's share of our time was all about God's plan for building unity, which was the roles of marriage. And husbands loving their wives as Christ loved the church. Nearly impossible, but something every husband here ought to strive and pour themselves into. And for wives to yield to their husbands and encourage his leadership and allow for him and encourage it. And guys, you got to step forward. That's a way to love your wife as well, to step forward and say, okay, I'm willing to be a servant leader in my family.
I think, Scott, those 3 things that we had actually talked about previous to this really lead up to this intimacy.
Yeah.
And it lays the groundwork to actually having true intimacy, which is what we all crave.
And this is the 4th point, which flows right from that passage. You're exactly right. It's why all of you are taking the class. You're taking this class because you're looking for intimacy. You want intimacy in marriage. You want it to improve. Some of you are really struggling in your marriage, and this is what you long for. You crave for this. Others of you have a good marriage, but you always know there's room for improvement. We want to build that intimacy. And yet, you're right. You're exactly right. Those previous 3 lead to this intimacy. And this is what Moses was talking about when he wrote this passage in Ephesians 2. In Genesis 2, verses 24 and 25, that for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, that's severance, and shall hold fast to his wife, that's permanence, and the two shall be one flesh, that is unity, and they were both naked and were not ashamed. That's intimacy. We're talking about intimacy here. We're just not just talking about sex, but that's a part of it. We're talking about this absolute open intimacy with one another, that we share everything in life with one another. And that kind of intimacy, that sharing of everything in life, it
But-
demands
Yeah,
some
and
things.
I also think, too, this also lays a groundwork for the sexual part of intimacy, as we're going to get to a little bit later, but a lot of people like to jump to just that.
Right.
But this has a big part.
The openness of
intimacy.
one's life with one another. And for a lot of people, the sex it comes early, even before it should, before marriage. And for us, we waited until we were married. There was no sex until we were married. But had there not been the other kind of intimacy, just the openness of life with one another, after a while the sex would have died out. And so this is a big deal. And in order for that intimacy to be real, there's got to be complete and absolute honesty. There must be honesty.
And no keeping things from each other or hiding things from each other. Open, honest honesty.
Which leads to trust.
And with trust, I know Scott and I both, we know each other's passwords. We don't have any passwords that we keep from each other for our phones and for our iPads. And it's not because we don't trust each other, it's because we do trust
Which is
each other.
mutual accountability. It builds trust. That when you have that kind of mutual accountability, you build trust. So having an open life, if you've got like a secret room that nobody's allowed in, or you've got a secret drawer that you keep locked that your wife or your husband's never allowed to go in that drawer, then there's not trust in the relationship. Your family does not trust you. Your wife doesn't trust you. Your husband doesn't trust you. If nobody's allowed on your phone. I got a phone call from someone a while ago, all upset because they had seen in their husband's phone that there was a terribly inappropriate conversation that was going on. And then the husband's all upset because his wife looked at his phone. I said, what? And that's craziness. The only reason you don't want your wife on your phone is because you're hiding something. She can't trust you. You don't have intimacy. And I've got no time for a husband or a wife that keeps a secret part of their life separate from their husband or wife. You are not one flesh. You're not practicing the vows of your marriage. You're not truly married. You're not practicing marriage in the way that God wants you to practice marriage.
It's the breeding ground for mistrust throughout, and it will just keep coming up no matter what.
The devil loves the darkness. He loves the secrets. He wants you to have a secret part of your life. And there are men that have like secret rooms that nobody in their family is allowed in. That is absolutely craziness and wrongful, sinful. And so do not have a secret part of your life. I know I'm coming really hard on this, and maybe some of you, maybe there's a man out there or a wife out there is like all of a sudden you're all hot and bothered over this. It's because God the Holy Spirit is convicting your heart right now. You ought not to have anything that you are hiding from your husband and your wife. Phones, computers, iPads, everything. Now, there might be some work, maybe you work for NASA or you work for, some kind of a organization, or maybe you're a professional psychologist or a counselor or something, and you have to, that you are sworn to that kind of secrecy. But I'm telling you, as far as your life goes, we ought to be open books with one another. There must be trust, mutual accountability.
I think there also has to be time, too.
There has to be time,
Time.
yes.
Frequent time that we, spend together, but also...
As in daily.
Daily.
Daily, almost daily. Sometimes there may be some days where you just can't, you just cross each other,
Yeah.
in the hallway.
Right.
Say, hey, honey, have a good day at work. But
Right.
really, you need that daily time together.
Also, lengthy time. And
Yes.
one of the things that Scott and I did when our kids were younger, right before Christmas, we decided that we would not buy each other any Christmas gifts, but the Christmas gift to each other would be time. And so we planned to go away. I think we went like a Friday, took off on a Friday, did Christmas shopping for the kids. Friday night, we got a hotel room. That was our gift to each other.
And there was a little bit of intimacy then.
We wrapped Christmas gifts for our
I
kids.
shopped with her, and
That's
she was intimate
right.
with me. It was like,
It was a good exchange there. And when we would wrap our gifts together in the hotel room. We'd have a nice dinner together, and we'd come home, and our gifts would be done, our Christmas shopping would be done, and we had time together. And that was very, very meaningful, I think, to both of us, because we could get each other gifts, but time is what really we needed at that time with small kids.
yeah.
Time away.
And we practice this all the while. A lot of you know you've got small kids, and it's a tough thing. Kids can really get in the way of intimacy in general, because your conversations even are surrounding the kids rather than just the conversations of life and what you think and your values and things like that. And so We knew that kids could get in the way that way. So we actually did this periodically. The Christmas thing was an annual thing. Every year we would do this right after Thanksgiving. But we would also, for anniversaries, we'd do overnighters for anniversaries. And we had, my sister and brother-in-law would take our kids. We had some people that we could trust to take our kids. And so they would take them overnight, sometimes for a couple of days. But that was important to us, to get away without the kids. We did a weekly date. It was every other week. We did a weekly family night. So Friday nights were family night. Every other Friday was just marriage, just the two of us. Date night, we'd get a babysitter. Kids would scream and holler and say, I don't want you to go, and all that stuff. But we would always say to them that Mommy and Daddy are getting time alone together because we love you. We want to show you a good marriage. And so we let them cry. And we just let them be with the babysitter, and we went off and had our date
One night we did have, when Junior was old enough, I do have to tell a story about him. When he was old enough to babysit, we had him babysit for the first time one night. And so we, kind of gave him the outline, the rules and everything. And we went out, and we came back, and I said to Erica, I said, well, how was it? First I asked Junior, how did it go? He said, it was great.
Yeah.
Anytime you want to babysit, you just tell me it's great. It was great. I said, oh, good. And then I asked Erica how it went. And Erica said, he just sat in a chair and had us bring him food and bring him stuff all night. So we had to tell Junior, that's parenting. That's not babysitting.
He has since learned servant leadership, what servant leadership is. It's not being served and serving, but anyway. Yeah. But there has to be that time. And so for us, every other week, Friday night was date night, and then every other Friday night was family night. We did something with the kids together. That time is huge. It's really important. And the greatest gift that you can give to your kids, moms and dads, listen to this, the greatest gift that you can give to your kids is a good marriage. The best gift you can give your kids is a good marriage. Do not sacrifice your marriage for the sake of your kids, because it's not for the sake of your kids. You sacrifice your marriage for your kids, you are hurting your kids. You need to give them a good marriage. Those date nights are huge. You need to be able to give your kids away to a babysitter, your parents or in-laws or brother or sister or whatever, whoever it is. Find a good babysitter that you can trust and use the babysitter. Use bridge kids. Use bridge kids as well on Sunday mornings and sit with your husband and wife.
It has been said, too, the greatest gift of security you can give your kids is to love your spouse.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Your kids need to be able to see that. All right, so there must be expressions of love. There must be time, and then there must be expressions, frequent and periodically, lengthy. That's what you said. That's exactly right. There must be time. And then there must be expressions of love. It's like the woman said to her husband. She said, you never tell me I love you anymore. And he said, well, I told you I loved you the day we got married, and if I change my mind, I'll let you know. That's not good. That's not agape, okay? There needs to be actual expressions of love, saying I love you.
I think on those days when it gets busy and you don't get to see each other very often, it might just be a hi and goodbye because of something going on. I think the expressions of love, staying in touch with texting.
Yeah.
We have the
ability. We have that available today, yes.
We should use it. Yeah. And I think so often it's used to, rant and rave, but why not show those expressions of love? There's something that it means a whole lot in a busy day, and I reach out and I get a text, and, it could be just a simple, I love you, or how's your day?
You want to be careful. Make sure, though, that you send those expressions of love to your spouse. I had done that one time. Because I would have really early morning appointments, 6 a.m., and I met with the guy, and I knew Linda was still sleeping. And so at 7, I knew she was up by then, helped getting the kids ready for school when I was done with that meeting. And 7 a.m., I wrote a text, said, good morning, I love you, and sent it to Becky Hart. If you know Becky, because she was the last person I had sent a text to, I guess, the day before. And I sent to the wrong person, so right away I sent a text to Becky, to her husband Paul, and to Linda, telling them about the mistake.
And that's why it's good to have each other's passwords, so we can always check up on that.
Exactly. So anyway, there must be, but those expressions of love should be in the language that your spouse understands best. Mm-hmm. So we talked about this book just a little bit. I think it's a great book. I would recommend, this is a great book for the two of you to do together. Read this book together. It really is a good book. This is Emerson Eggerichs and Love and Respect. It was a New York Times bestseller probably, I think, 20 years ago, but it still sells like crazy today. It really is a very good book.
It's what we are desiring.
It's what we're desiring, yes.
So that's why it's such a
I think that's why. It speaks of men's desire for respect and women's desire for love. Both men and women both need love and respect, the same. Mm-hmm. But they look for it in different ways and for different reasons. Let me just read this, what Eggerich says. He says, love best motivates a woman and respect most powerfully motivates a man. This is from research. Research reveals that during marital conflict, a husband most often reacts when feeling disrespected, and a wife reacts when feeling unloved. He goes on, he says, we asked 7,000 people this question. When you are in a conflict with your spouse or significant other, do you feel unloved or disrespected? 83% of the men said disrespected. 72% of the women said unloved. Though we all need love and respect equally, the felt need differs during conflict, and this difference is as different as pink is from blue. So I encourage you, read that book and, express your love to your husband in terms of respect and admiration.
And kind of giving that, knowing how to express love, that book that I mentioned earlier, The 5 Love Languages.
This one right here. This one right here, Gary Chapman. Again, this is probably, I would guess, 20 years ago or so, maybe 25 years ago. But it's still a bestseller, and it's still a great book, and it's been updated. So I really encourage you to read this book together. Yeah, let me give you these.
Okay.
Let's go through these real quick. These are the 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman, and they're this: words of affirmation, which is words of love, or hey, great job, or you look beautiful today,
Oh,
Linda,
thank you.
which you do. I'm saying that from the heart, not just as an example. And the second one is acts of service. Now, this is probably Linda's primary gift. She would rather me do something for her, I think, than just about anything. And
Well, it depends on the day. Sometimes if I'm out,
that is the problem here, is maybe some of you guys will understand this a little bit, because the problem is when I'm trying to figure out what are her love languages, they change.
Well, the trouble is it says 5 love languages, and there's 7 days of the week, and I could have, it could be a different one every day. You just got to know which one.
Good point there. So you got to figure out which day of the week is her love language. Receiving gifts is another love language. It is giving something special. Quality time. Quality time. The 5th one is physical touch. Now, here's how you can often tell what a person's love language is. What do they tend to give away themselves? Is it words of affirmation? People that are very encouraging with their words, usually that's their love language. We tend to love others with our love language. That's a good way to be able to tell what their love language is. And this is how I can tell with Linda, because she will often, to do something really special for me, she'll do something for me, which that's her love language. Receiving gifts, same way, giving a special gift, quality time. So figure out what your spouse's love language is and speak in those terms. Next, there must be shared expressions of love, but also for intimacy, there must be shared interests. It's getting into each other's worlds. Linda and I right now, so neither one of us have any experience with this, but one day Linda said to me, she's known I've always wanted to become a private pilot. It's always been a dream of mine. Didn't ever think I would do it.
I didn't really ever want him to, because we owned a boat several years ago. And every time we would go out boating, I would hear, uh-oh, I forgot to put the plug in the boat.
Well, it wasn't every time.
Well, quite a
Don't
few
you know when
times.
you're arguing, you're not supposed to ever say ever?
Oh, that's right. Okay, we'll get to that. Okay.
But
But it was most of the time
I had
we
to
would
jump in the water,
go,
put the plug in the back,
And I said, if you go flying, you get up in the air, you can't say, uh-oh. There's no plan B. I can tread water, but I can't fly.
And yet,
So-
we are both now in the process of taking flying lessons.
That's right.
Really, because it's something that we are enjoying. It's stretching us both together. We're enjoying doing something together. Find an interest besides the kids that you can pour yourselves into that's just something the two of you do together. There must be shared interest.
And sometimes even if you're not so much interested, try it.
Yes.
Just get into their world.
Try it.
Try it a little bit.
You bet.
It makes them feel good.
And there must be shared laughter, which a lot of our shared laughter comes from our shared interests.
That's right.
There was a really interesting study that was done several years ago where they took coworkers who disliked each other, just had a lot of animosity, a lot of fighting in the office together. And they did this across the board. Many, many companies, they did this. But they took the coworkers who on their team seemed to dislike each other the most, and they had them watch a comedian together, just on video. And what they did is, it basically, at the beginning of the comedian was hilariously funny, but they weren't laughing a whole lot because they were sitting next to this person that they didn't like. By the end of the stand-up comics routine, they were laughing out loud together, and they were really laughing, being body shaking, laughing together. And the difference with this coworker after that episode, for the rest of that week, was like night and day. You had these two people that obviously to everybody else didn't like each other. After they laughed together with this comedian, all of a sudden they're enjoying each other at work and getting along at work. Because there's something about laughter, joint laughter, that brings people together, that creates that kind of unity and gives you a sense of intimacy.
The Bible talks about that, laughter being good medicine.
It certainly is. So find out a way to laugh together, enjoy each other, enjoy your time together with each other. It's a big
If I
deal.
can also say too, sometimes just laugh at yourself.
Yeah.
Just laugh at yourself. Okay, you messed it up, you made a mistake. Okay, we're just going to laugh about
Linda
it.
did this. One of the things that was important to Linda when our kids were little is she always wanted us to have our dinner meal together. Because my schedule as a pastor was always all over the place, but she really made sure we had our evening meals together. Sometimes we had them early, and sometimes we had them late, just so we could eat together. But Linda did this with the kids, and I thought this was a great idea. She started telling the kids, find something funny, because at dinner tonight we're going to share the funniest thing that happened today. And the laughter around that table, as the kids are just telling stories and laughing, it did something for our family. It brings, to this day, we just love to laugh together. That brings people together. Hey, listen, I'm going to do this because we're going to get into some specifics before we end this tonight as well. But I'm going to go through something that I think is a huge need, because so many marriages, when they talk about the difficulty in their marriages, it's about communication, right? You ever say that? We struggle with communication. We just can't communicate very well. When you communicate, it turns into a shouting match. Or because you know that it's going to be uncomfortable, you just don't go there, you just don't talk. So I want to give to us something that comes out of Ephesians chapter 4, and you can actually find these in your Bible yourself at a later date. It might be a really good exercise, a date night thing to do, is to actually find these in Ephesians 4 and look these up and talk about these things. We had our kids memorize these 4 rules of communication. They had to memorize them, and they had to explain each of these 4 points when they were little kids, because I wanted my kids to grow up knowing how to communicate when it comes to difficult things. So let's go through these. This is the 4 rules of communications out of Ephesians chapter 4. It's the latter part of Ephesians chapter 4, starting in verse 24, 23, right in there. It talks about putting off the old, putting on the new. And verse 25 gives us the very first point, and that is be honest. Now, here's the thing. Because a lot of people use honesty as an excuse to dump all over everybody else. You can be honest about you. I'm just being honest. I know you don't like to hear this, but it's the truth. And we like to say that kind of stuff. We're just being mean. Be honest about yourself first. Can you be honest about yourself first? Can you be honest about yourself and admit your own faults first? Confess what you've done wrong. Confess your own sins. And be open and confess where you are wrong. That's where it has to start. Be honest about yourself first.
And doing it in love.
In love, because he says that actually earlier on in Ephesians, speaking the truth in love. So when I'm being honest about another person's faults, am I doing it in such a way that they know that I'm here for them, that I want to help them, that I'm really building them up with this statement?
Mm-hmm. Well, because you hear people say, I'm just being brutally honest.
Yeah.
Be
There's
careful
no such thing. There's no
about
such
the
thing.
brutal, yeah.
Yeah, the brutal is not right. It's supposed to be honest in love. Yeah. For example, is it loving? Your wife says, does this dress make me look fat? How do you answer that one?
How do you
guys,
answer that one,
yeah,
Scott?
guys, you don't say, no, it's your fat that makes you look fat. No, don't say that. In fact, I saw this post. Somebody had posted this last week where this guy says, I am in real trouble. I'm scared to go home. And someone says, why? And he said, my wife sent me a picture of herself in a new dress. She said, does this dress make me look fat? And I wanted to say, no, N-O-O-O, exclamation point. But it's spell check corrected to M-O-O-O, exclamation point. Moo! That's not the kind of honesty that you want. No, you need to speak the truth in love. Honesty with love. Number 2, this is big, keep current.
Yep.
This is oftentimes why communication is so bad, is because we're talking about the subject.
You never.
And going to the
Yep.
past, and all of a sudden everything but with the kitchen sink is thrown into this argument. Stay on topic. Talk about the matter at hand, not about what happened a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Because if you're doing that, that means you've got resentment. You've still got resentment that
You're
you're
just
holding.
unpacking the bag. I heard a quote a long time ago, and I just love it. It talks about we invite defeat by remembering what we should forget and forgetting what we should remember.
Oh.
And there are just some
That's good.
things that are little, it's like, just let them roll off your back, the little things, you
Yeah.
know? But keep current with, what you're talking about at that time. Don't bring up the past.
This means dealing with today's problems today and letting go of yesterday's. If you didn't bring it up last week, if you didn't talk about it 2 weeks ago, you gave up the right to bring it up today. So don't pile this stuff up and keep it all up and then having a big pile here so that you can just vomit all over your spouse. Instead, talk about the matter at hand. So be honest and then keep current. Third one is attack the problem, not the person. And every time I bring this up, I've heard someone say, well, he is the problem. No, the person is not the problem. It's the disagreement that's the problem. And this we find in verses 28 through 30. Keep current is chapter 4, verses 26 and 27. And actually, it's really important to understand it because there, Paul says, do not give the devil a foothold. Because when you are bringing up the past, when you do not forgive, when you fail to forgive, you are giving the devil space in your life. The devil is the divider. He will do all he can to divide your marriage. And when you do not forgive, when you bring the past up into a current argument, you are allowing the devil to have a room in your heart to divide the two of you. And so you got to make sure you keep current. Forgive those things in the past and deal with today's issues today. Then attack the problem, not the person. That's verses 28 through 30. Great passage there that I'm not going to spend the time getting into right now, but he says, I want you to put away acting in this way. So don't attack people, attack whatever the problem is.
I think there's a few questions, too, that we can ask ourselves when we're in this.
Absolutely. These are really good. What is the real problem here? Okay, what do I want that I'm not getting? What's the real problem here? What do I want that I'm not getting? Thirdly,
How can I solve this problem? Because a lot of times we don't go into it looking to solve it.
Yeah.
We look at going into it for a fight.
yes, we just want to unload what's on my chest. I got to get this off my chest. I just got to feel better about this. And you're creating more problems by doing that rather than solving the problem. Are your words done in such a way that you're solution oriented? You're going after solving the problem. Fourth one, how can I help him or her?
A lot of times we think that we are when we unload all of this, but we have to make sure it's in the right context.
Yeah,
We
and I think
truly
that our
are helping.
goal usually, when you really take a good look at our goal, like, well, what do I want that I'm not getting? And I know when I'm at my worst, that's the problem here, is I'm not really looking to help the person that I'm upset with. I'm looking to help myself. But if I can turn this around, because here in this passage, the Apostle Paul actually says that all of our words ought to be edifying, building up, said in love for the person, helping the person that we're actually speaking to. And so how can I actually help him or her? So the 4 rules are be honest, keep current, attack the problem, not the person. And then number 4 is act. Don't react. This actually comes from verses 31 and 32.
Because reacting is really what we feel like doing.
Yes, that's all about feelings. And feelings get in the way of good communication. Instead, what we have to be intentional. Actions are what we intentionally do. So reactions are what you feel like doing and what you feel like saying. When you're angry, when you're in an argument, don't respond in the way you feel. Instead, be intentional. Actions are what you intentionally do. And so here's the reactions that he says that we're to avoid. We're not to react, and this is what he says we're to avoid. Let all bitterness, that's holding on to the past, and wrath, that's the anger, the seething anger. And then he says anger, which is the expression of anger, and clamor, that's yelling. Clamor is yelling. And slander, that's talking to somebody else about this person. In other words, that's going to one of your friends or to your mom or your coworkers and talking about your spouse. This is that should be put away from you, along with all malice. That's ill intent. Put away those reactions. Instead, these are the actions that we're to take. Be kind. The best time to be kind to someone is when you're angry with them. And you just do an act of kindness that you know that they would appreciate. Do something for them. I learned a long time ago when our kids were little, I learned this, that if I was upset with Linda, and I never told her about this at the time, because then she would, what are you upset with me about? But I would actually buy her something. And just get something I knew that she liked. Because you know what it would do? It would change my feelings. It would take away my anger by doing a loving act towards her.
You just bought me something the other day.
It wasn't out of anger, I guarantee it.
All right.
So be kind to one another, tender-hearted. That is, feel for them. Because usually in these arguments, we're only concerned, in fact, we listen with ears to respond rather than really feeling for what is it that they're feeling? What are they hurting about? So tenderhearted, forgiving one another. Why? Not because they deserve it. Forgiveness is not something anybody deserves. I didn't deserve God's forgiveness, but it says God in Christ forgave you. Forgiveness is a gift, and it's for your benefit. So those are the actions that he says we're to take. So these are the 4 rules of communication, and man, they really matter. We're going to get into some specifics now. And so we've got a little bit of time left, and I think that these can be really helpful. So the specifics.
Got everybody's attention with that.
Yeah, there we go.
Right there.
Put sex up there, and everybody like, those who are falling asleep, like, oh, we're talking about sex here.
But like you said, I think it can be the biggest area for resentment.
It absolutely can, both with men and women. Either with men in where a wife feels as though that's all that he wants, and he's just looking for this, and I feel like I'm being used, or for a man who's feeling like he's manipulated with sex, is being withheld for whatever reason, and it can go both ways. But this can be, and I know couples where there's resentment because sex started too soon, and it is the biggest area for resentment. And so for starters, I think what we need to talk about is the purpose, the purpose for sex. And when you think about it, as enjoyable and as pleasurable it is, because the truth is that whenever anybody wants to compare the greatest feeling that they've ever had, they'll compare it with sex. And so...
well, they do. They have a cake called Better Than Sex Cake.
And I don't
you
believe
can
it.
buy mascara Better Than Sex Mascara.
Yeah, I don't believe either one of them. But they use these comparisons because it is something that God has given us that's the most pleasurable experience that people can have.
And it is, if we've been practicing the principles that we have been going through, the principles up to this point.
Yes, and a big part of this is when you consider not just the pleasurableness of the experience itself, but there's nothing that a human being can go through that would give them a greater feeling of oneness with another person. That when we've talked about other things for unity and even like laughter and all that kind of stuff, but nothing, because physically, that's the act of sex itself. It is the joining of 2 individuals becoming one. And the purpose for this is to build that kind of unity between a couple where they're sensing this complete oneness and at the same time together also experiencing pleasure by serving one another.
It's a good way for us to reflect back. If we are having trouble with this area, where did it break down? Did it break down in the love and respect? Did it break down in communication? Why are we having trouble? Going back and looking at those other points, through Scripture.
All right, let's talk about parameters a bit, because I think it's very important that sometimes sex winds up getting misused and creates resentment because husbands and wives have gone outside of the parameters. And one thing that Scripture is very clear about, and that is sex is only for a man and a woman within the boundaries of marriage. That's what was created for. And that when we take it outside of those boundaries, then we wind up creating problems because, some of the greatest problems in all of humanity have been things that God gave to us as gifts for our good, that we wound up corrupting, using them outside of his parameters, and sex is one of those areas. And so we'd say there's a couple of absolutes, and that is absolutely no sex outside of marriage. Never going outside of your marriage bond for sexual activity. No affairs whatsoever. There's no such thing as an open marriage where we have the freedom to play around outside of the marriage in order to get this pleasure. And it's hard for me to believe, I think in this day and age of common pornography, that these kinds of things have become more common, where there are couples that they swap partners and they feel as though, but we're in agreement on it, but God is not. And it will destroy your relationship. It will destroy your marriage. So we're talking no affairs, no swapping partners, no teasing. As some see this as harmless teasing at work, and it's just, I get a little bit of pleasure out of this. I would never cross these boundaries, but the truth is, and one marriage counselor described it to me this way, because when I was going really through some things with a staff member that we wound up having to let go, not at this church, another church, but he had crossed some boundaries, and this marriage counselor said to me, she said, I've seen this time and again, and what these guys will do, or what women will do, is they have a conscience, because they grew up with a moral background, they have a conscience, and so they may think as though they bump up against their conscience. They'll allow themselves to bump up to as far as their conscience will let them go. And that might be some teasing things that are being said, maybe a little bit of physical flaunting or bumping into or statements or tight hugs, close hugs that just get lengthier and lengthier. But every time you bump up against your conscience, you move it a little bit. And so that little bit of flirting at work, eventually, and I've seen it happen, it's sad, 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 lives ruined because of it. Those flirtatious conversations wind up turning into
Breaks down the
an
barriers.
affair. Yes. So keep the barrier there. Keep the embarrassment there, and don't cross that. When we're talking about parameters, though, I oftentimes get asked, what's allowed as far as sex? I mean, you get asked that? Yeah, I do. What is actually allowed when it comes to sex and marriage? And I'll want to say, what about this, or what about that? And here's the answer. Whatever is agreeable to both and practiced selflessly. Whatever is agreeable to both, that is, with just husband and wife only. What is agreeable to both parties, both husband and wife, and practiced selflessly? That's why the author of Hebrews said that in the marriage bed it is undefiled. And so what a husband and wife agree to do together that they can do selflessly together is within God's desire. And God cheers you on. Nothing is indecent before God in this way. When you're a husband and wife, He is cheering you on. He wants to be able to enjoy the pleasure and the oneness of sexual activity between the two of you. I want to give some protections. Let's talk about some of these protections as well. And first one here, Linda, we're talking about protections. I mean, this matters a lot. What is that?
The first, your best friend should be your spouse.
Yeah.
No best friends out, or even you hear at work, oh, it's my work wife or my work husband.
Yeah, that's something.
Things like that.
I don't allow that. I mean, I've heard that here and there, even in a church staffing situation. I've simply said that's not allowed. We don't ever going to refer to somebody as your work wife or your work husband. That's just not allowed. These barriers, these protections are there, and they're
And
good
we have put
reason to have
protections
them.
even in our own family, and that is you don't ever ride with another woman alone in the car. Sure, our daughter-in-law or daughter, but
That's my family. Member. My sister.
But outside of family, you don't. It's just a protection that you have put up.
And we have that actually as a staff. We insist on that even as our church staff, that none of our married men are ever allowed to ride alone in a car with a woman or be alone in any kind of a setting. So I think that having those things in our life, that's not a guarantee, but I tell you what, it's a protection. It keeps some boundaries up there like guardrails that keeps us from making some major mistakes. I say there's no such thing as a solo friendship with a member of the opposite sex. If you're married and you're a guy, you do not have a female friend that is not your wife's friend at the same time. Just don't. Because the fact of the matter is, when a man and a woman develop a friendship, attraction follows. And so don't allow yourself to get in that situation where I'm good friends. I can just tell her things I can't tell other people. No, make a friend with a guy. Same thing, women. You don't have a guy who's just, he's my good friend. I can talk to him about all kinds of things. No. You're getting yourself in dangerous territory. Protect yourself. Make friends with women. Now, obviously, husbands and wives can have couples as friends, but even be careful with the interaction between the man and the woman and the man in that scenario. That you can have friends, of course, that are couples, but be very careful about those male-female friendships. This is a protection.
Yeah, and nobody sets out to have, an affair.
Very few people.
Very few people set
Most
out to
affairs happen where they just never dreamed
It
would
was
take
all this
place.
little stuff that led up to it that blurred the lines and.
And then I think there needs to be open communication regarding all relationships that you have. So you're talking with each other about conversations that you're having with members of the opposite sex, whether it's at work or church or in other settings as well. And here's a line that I say is an absolute that just cannot ever be crossed, because every time, again, I've been doing this for 35 years, I've been a pastor. I've seen way, way too many affairs. I've never known an affair. In fact, there was a book that was written some years ago about affairs that took place in the church, many of them with church staff members, where there were church staff members that had affairs. And not a single one of these affairs happened until this happened. And every affair I've ever known, this line was crossed. And this is the line: never share marriage struggles with the opposite sex. Never. So if I'm having struggles with Linda, I am not ever going to share those struggles with a woman. Never. I'll share them with a man, with one of my friends, if I have her permission, because otherwise it's slander. And if she's okay with me talking to my brother-in-law or my pastor, whoever, I'll do that. But do not go to a member of the opposite sex, a work friend, a church friend, a neighbor friend. Do not share your marriage struggles with the opposite sex because it almost always leads to inappropriate conversation. And any time that I have known an affair, it started with that conversation. So make that as an absolute.
Or joining in with the husband or wife bashing. That can happen in circles.
And that's like a whole nother matter even. Just going out with the girls and then bashing their husbands and stuff. And that's like a whole nother matter. But yeah, these protections are very important. So protect yourself. So some of these specifics. Another specific, finances. Finance is the biggest area for fighting. So like sex is the biggest area for resentment. Finance is the biggest area for fighting. The three things that couples fight about, which actually are the things we're talking about, that is sex, money, and children. Finances is number one when it comes to this. And so I would say a couple of things here to help you out with this. First of all, take Financial Peace University together. We offer it here at the church all the time.
There's been some amazing stories that have come out of taking that.
Man. You bet. Unifying that takes place because of taking this class together and getting on the same page with finances. Marriage problems disappearing virtually because of taking Financial Peace University together. With my kids, I've told all my kids need to take this. This is really such a valuable class. Take FPU together. Do it together. Next, establish written agreement, which is part of FPU, things like having goals, financial goals.
Budget.
Budgeting together, looking over that budget together, having what's your savings, how much you want to save. Here's another one. Do this, and I'm surprised by how many couples today, it seems like it's something that's disappearing with young couples, but I think it's a big deal. I really think this is a big deal, and that is one of the first steps you ought to take when you get married, and that is put your accounts, your money together. Say, well, if you can't trust each other to put your money together, you should not be getting married. And if you are married at this point, you ought to have that kind of openness with one another, that you develop that trust where you put your money together, have joint accounts. Because if you're like, I've got this little account that I'm keeping off the side just in case, that's like a death nail to your marriage. Your accounts ought to be shared. And then budget together. Go through your money together. Linda and I mean, we do this as much as possible. I think it's really important. Whether it's paying bills together or going over the bill payment together. We do everything online now, but every couple of months, Linda doesn't really care about this stuff, but she needs to know about it, and it's something we need to be on the same page. So we go over the budget.
I just always think, just tell me how much I got to spend.
Yeah, that's what she would rather do. But I want her to be able to see, to be able to actually see it on the spreadsheet. So you got to, as much as possible, talk through these things, budget together, go through your finances together. Then the third specific that we want to talk about is kids. This is the biggest area for division. Boy, can kids create division. Now, they don't want to. I mean, they want the two of you to be together. And that, I mean, it's huge. When mom and dad fighting is a real problem, and yet they love to divide and conquer.
They know how to do it.
They are manipulators.
Yeah.
That's like their kids. That's why they have you as parents. They're little sinners.
Well, if you even notice, too, sometimes our kids were sitting, we're sitting on the couch, and our kids, when they were little, they would even try to, like, billow between us.
In between us, that's right. Kids will divide and conquer. They'll try to get their way by getting the two of you at odds when it comes to some of their stuff, and they'll ask mom, and then they'll go to, and if mom says no, they'll go to dad, and we, actually Junior, our teaching pastor, lead teaching pastor Junior, when he was little, I mean, he was a kid, okay? But he was a master at this. So he would try to get us to disagree on something that he wanted to do, because if he could get us to disagree, then one would soften up. And so we actually took it further when it came to discipline with that. But they will, and because of course they're going to. It's up to you to not let them to do that. And so you make up your mind. You're not going to let the kids divide you. And we've talked a little bit about this earlier, but this is, man, your marriage must be the priority. Your marriage has got to be the priority. And it's best for you, the two of you. It's best for your kids. And by the way, your kids are going to move out someday. And they may move back into your basement again. We've experienced that. But your kids are going to move out someday. But you're going to have each other. And God says, I want the two of you to be together for the rest of your life.
And taking it from somebody who has grown children, married children, and one about ready to get married, it's what we want for our kids. We want our kids to make their marriage their priority and have a strong marriage.
Yeah, and they have to see that in us. So we have to be the ones to model it. Your marriage has got to be the priority. That may be a really good discussion for you to have right now is our marriage really our priority? Or is our lives too wrapped up? Do we have a child-centered family, or do we have a marriage-centered family? For us, we wanted our kids to know that we're glad they're in our home, but the center, the core of this family is the two of us, our marriage. That's what matters most. So your marriage must be the priority. And there's some things underneath this that I think is important. Weekly date nights. And if it's every other week, that's fine. If you spread it out monthly, I think that's a little too distant. I think you need more time than that. Weekly date nights. And I think along with this is evenings. You put the kids to bed early enough where you get your evenings together. You can have some conversations. So weekly date nights. We talked about this already. We don't have to go into that a whole lot, but get out of town overnight. Find somebody you can trust with your kids and take your kids overnight.
Keeping the romance in your marriage.
Yes, keep that romance alive. Get out of town. This is important too. Lock your bedroom door. Most of us who have grown kids have some stories about being interrupted. It can be a little embarrassing, but the fact that you can be interrupted, if you don't have a lock on your door, put a lock on your door. Because if you don't have a lockable door, there's like all this, I fear something. Lock your bedroom door. And have your kids, teach your kids to respect that bedroom. That's mom and dad's place. And all right, then we talked about this as well. Identify child care. Find somebody you can trust. And we've got a lot of those in the church. We've got some babysitters here. If you have some questions about that, call your campus pastor, and he could probably get you connected with somebody that can get you, give you some babysitting. And, there's things you can find out about them. You can find out if they've taken a class, and you can even call around to find out who knows these people. There are good, trustworthy babysitters that you can depend on, so identify some good child care. And then when it comes to children, your kids will divide and conquer. Your marriage must be the priority. Number 3, get on the same page when it comes to child training. Because again, it's a huge area that separates a lot of moms and dads.
It's confusing for kids.
It's very confusing for the kids. And Linda and I we were on the same page with our child training philosophy. We explain more of this in the parenting class. But when the kids were little, I was tougher than Linda. I was the one that was really tough. When the kids got into their high school years, Linda was tougher than me. Mm-hmm. So if there was any kind of an argument, she thought I was too tough when they were little, and then I thought she was too tough when they were older. Mm-hmm. So we did have these discussions. But I tell you what, if the kids sense that, oh man, they're going to go after it. Because that'll help them get their way. And of course, that's what they're going to want. So what I would say is a really good step, if you have not taken the child training class yet, on raising, we have 2 of them. We offer 2 of them. One is for raising younger children, and one is raising older kids. Take those classes. And otherwise, if you want to email your campus pastor, there's a lot of really good books on child training as well, video series and that sort of thing. But it's really important that you be in agreement, be on the same page, and especially in front of the kids, that you be on the same page when it comes to these things. Well, listen, there's of course more that could be said about marriage. There's other stuff, other points that we could bring, and all of that I think can be very helpful. There's other classes you could take, other videos you could watch, and all of that. But I think we've shared enough material. I really do. I think what it comes down to at this point is for you to make up your mind that you're going to go after your marriage for all you're worth, and that you're going to be Christ-like and godly, pleasing and honoring to God in everything that you say and do. This is something that I share with every couple when they're getting married, and it's oftentimes what I share actually at the altar. What I love most about what Paul and Peter both emphasize when they talk to husbands and wives in Ephesians chapter 5 when Paul wrote to the husbands and to the wives. And that is what he repeats himself saying. Peter does this as well. He says, as to the Lord. Now here's the thing that I know. And I don't always live up to this, but I know this. Man, I know this to be so true. If every time I open up my mouth and I speak to Linda, if my words are pleasing to him, not necessarily to Linda, because sometimes we have to have tough conversations that aren't pleasing. But I know that if every time I open my mouth and speak to Linda, my words are pleasing to Jesus, we're going to have a good marriage. I know that. And Linda knows the same thing. And every time she opens her mouth, that her words are pleasing. And everything that she does and everything that I do, that it's pleasing unto God first and foremost, we're going to have a good marriage. The author of Ecclesiastes said that a cord of 3 strands cannot be broken. And you know what he's talking about there? You have 2 people are going to have a hard time getting along, but if there's that cord, that 3rd strand, that is the Holy Spirit, God himself, interweaving himself in between. I used to braid my daughter's hair when she was in kindergarten. And so I learned how to braid. And I know you can't take 2 strands of hair and wrap them around and expect them to stay together.
You've tried.
We've tried.
It didn't work.
No, it didn't work. And so actually when Junior and Nicole got married, they didn't do a sand ceremony. They didn't do the unity candle. They did a braiding ceremony. They still have this rope that they braided in the wedding, where they took the 3 strands of the rope and they braided together, saying, we want God to be at the center. And if you make up your mind right now, you're going to go after your marriage for all you're worth, and that everything about your relationship, that you want it to be pleasing to God, you're going to wrap Him. He's that 3rd strand. It's the Holy Spirit creating that unity. Then I can guarantee you then, not because of anything that I can do or say, but because of what God has said, you will have a good marriage. So the question is, will you pour yourself into your marriage in this way, in such a way that God is honored and pleased? Discussion questions kind of to close. I think that these are going to be really helpful for you. What is your spouse's primary and secondary love language? Which of the communication rules do you struggle with most? What night can you schedule for a weekly, bi-weekly date night? And do you have fun together? Any joint interests? Do you have laugh together? If not, what should change? Get together in your discussion groups and talk about this. And then as a follow-through, then you make up the decision yourself. You're in this for the rest of your lives. And you're going to pour yourself into this marriage in such a way that God is honored and pleased. And the 2 of you can experience real intimacy.